creative turned seller, many years experience at various startups and scale-ups, offering business consultancy, sales consultancy, coaching, currently working as account executive at Metadata. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ricky. Excited to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I've seen a lot of your content and you're an incredible, am I allowed to say thought leader? It's a bit of a cringe term. You're an individual with very unique perspectives that really resonate. How's that?
Sure. It was funny. I was actually talking to Harry Sims, who was on your podcast as well, a good friend of mine. And we were just bantering back and forth about how almost like this trend of positioning yourself as a thought leader and whatnot is kind of leading to this weird like expert culture that's emerged. I don't know if you've kind of noticed this, but everyone's now an expert, right? It doesn't matter if you're like an entry-level SDR or a sales manager who's been in the game for a little bit, but like there's almost like no leeway for being a student anymore, like kind of taking time to learn the craft due to, again, I guess almost like this trend or pressure that people feel.
That's so true. My wife's a copywriter and she's been a freelance copywriter her entire career, like a specialized freelance copywriter. But we'd always joke that the freelance title is typically reserved for unemployed copywriters in between jobs. And that's become like the new sales coach. You know, like you can't find a job as an SDR, so you become the SDR coach. Like I'm helping other SDRs find jobs, right? So I get that. But I think you are a genuine expert. At least that's my opinion. I've seen your content, I've seen your thoughts, I know the people you've helped. And if you're running in circles with the likes of Harry Sims, you're having some really high-level conversations.
Sure. Well, student of the craft, still always learning. But
so one of the things that I've seen from you, which is so interesting, is like your satire, your comics that you write up. One of them recently went on about compensation. I'd love to start there because it is such a hot topic within sales. What are some of these, like, I don't know, like dodgy things going on in sales compensations these days?
Right. Yeah. I mean, just to kind of frame that up a little bit, I think the bigger issue that's kind of plaguing our realm, and our realm being tech sales mostly, is that a lot of sales reps just aren't aware of the game that's being played around them. And that's leading to a lot of issues like burnout, people kind of beating themselves up for not being good enough, kind of getting confused as to what aspects of the job they actually can control and what they can't control. I think that's intentional in a lot of ways, right? And for context, I've been in the game for 7 or so years now, so fairly tenured, still learning again, but it's crazy. Like at what point I even realized this, right? I certainly wasn't told this in my first sales jobs, even my first 2-3 sales jobs. There was always just kind of this external pressure of, all right, here's your numbers, everyone, here's your comp plan, go get them, right? And like, certainly like there'll be...
Can I tell you someone in an executive forum, like high level CROs, VPs of sales of organizations that are running sales teams of 100 plus. We had a conversation about how they were setting up their comp plan. And they're like, well, look, we've been given this target from the top and I've got 100 reps. And so we've broken it down loosely by 100. So we needed 100 million. Each rep needs to get $1 million. Then they discuss, well, what kind of coverage do you want? Oh, you want a 30% buffer. Okay, everyone should have a target of 1.3 million. And then they work this down to their quarterly targets. And they're like, yeah, that sounds good. If you add up everyone's targets, we hit our goals. Let's go. Right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's largely made up, right? It's made up in a boardroom with VCs or investors who are largely out of touch with the reality of the situation and how the product is fitting in the market and some actual indicators.
The company had like a 38% quota attainment. Like, where are your quotas coming from? How are you making these up? And reps really don't see that. It's hard sometimes to see that big picture where they feel like, oh, we're getting burned and churned on this. And if you look deep down and you're in those quiet conversations with the founders and the board, like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. I'm sorry to tell you. We find replacing you every year.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I think my first realization that there was something going around me that I wasn't aware of was one of my first sales jobs. And I remember we had a new manager come in, and this guy had been around the block, like plenty of experience, came in sort of, the message was he's going to help like revamp the sales team, or we're all going to just over exceed and things are going to change because we were in a bit of a slump before, right? We're kind of like just building out this commercial engine. Soon we realized, I don't think this guy's actually motivated to help us hit our numbers. And I was fairly junior at the time, right? I've only been doing it for a couple of years. I remember going to him to actually get deal advice, things that had stalled or had stuck. And this guy was giving very kind of generic, it was like very standoffish advice that just wasn't helpful. On the side, he was also going out for like 2-hour massages during the day and like really kind of showing up to work. Yeah.
I want his job.
I know, like, so it was kind of ideal for him. But for me, it was kind of just like, I couldn't really understand it, right? Because my understanding up until that point was, okay, like I hit my numbers and he hits his numbers and then we're all successful, right? So I couldn't understand why he wasn't really invested in my success at the time. And then I soon realized, like, it was a couple years after that, oh, his number, it has a buffer to it and it doesn't require me hitting my number for him to hit his number, and he needs like maybe 60% of his team to do so. That's the one of the big things that I think a lot of junior reps just aren't aware of.
And those sales leaders that come in and they like given lucky numbers and they can hit it with 60% of their reps. Like, again, their numbers were probably largely made up based on what the investors want. Like, it does all tell a story, but it's not based in reality. I see very little ground up quota calculations. Like, hey, if we worked our hardest in the current market, what's the best we could do? All right, that's the goal. That plus 10% is the goal. That plus 30% is the stretch goal. None of that. It's all some board level, made up number and filtered down to completely impractical solutions.
Exactly. And I think we're kind of seeing this now in this economy and just shit kind of hitting the fan in terms of how many of these venture-backed startups are beholden to these fake numbers, right? Like before, when times were good and money was abundant, maybe companies could get away with that. Sure, there was maybe individual level suffering, but for the most part, it was kind of ironed over. But I think it's been a big wake-up call for a lot of companies as to kind of just how sustainable the way that they're operating from a comp perspective is.
It really highlights the need for sales leaders to be really skilled at certain stages of sales leadership. It's a different game, that 1 million to 10 million, then the 10 to 100 and the 100 plus. But the advice I see running in these executive circles is, well, if each rep can bring in $500,000 and we need $6 million, we need to hire 9 reps. That's not how revenue scales. You don't buy it through sales reps, right? Like, do you see, you sit in these circles with sales leaders having these conversations and you see it in the industry, where do sales salaries sit? Are they like a short-term variable expense? Are they a midterm strategy? Like, what's happening with all these layoffs?
God, that might be a little bit above my pay grade, but certainly I think this is part of the cards falling situation, right? In terms of how real is an OTE promise, really, right? And I'd say for the most part, they're a selling tactic, right? To lure sales reps to a company with kind of this promise of, you'll make 300, 400 OTE, right? Base is this, but you hit target and you're gonna get this, but we're actually expecting you to totally over exceed, and that's totally within the realm of possibility. Which kind of goes back, if you're a candidate who's looking for your next gig, it really highlights the importance of doing your proper homework and vetting the opportunity instead of just believing these numbers wholesale. Because again, they're 9 times out of 10, if we're talking venture-backed startups, they're largely made up. And RepView, I'm sure you've heard of that resource, they're doing a lot of great work in kind of exposing some of this stuff. And I think that's, they're coming into play as being a huge source of value for a lot of reps who, I think are sort of for the first time sort of seeing information like this. Like back when I first started, there was nothing like this being talked about, right? And now it's kind of coming to light due to the work that they're doing. I think they call it off-target earnings, right? For OTE, like off-target earnings is like merch now. That's kind of highlighting some of that. So,
but I've never heard that term. Like, and I'm going to use that every day from now on. OTE, off-target earnings. Like, I love that. Because, like, there's 2 big lies in sales. The first big lie is OTE. Like, I could offer you $1 billion a year OTE, but your OTE is impractical. So I'm just selling you lies. And the second one is like the options and the share plans. and those things, which I feel a lot of reps are falling into as well. You hear the super lucky stories, but on average, to me, share options, unless done well into companies you understand that you would invest in, etc., are just a way to pay less, really, with the hope of a brighter future. What are some of these traps?
Absolutely true.
Like, what do reps need to be looking for when actually analyzing a comp plan? Like, how's this rigged against them?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that you can do. I think number one, just getting really clear on how many reps on the team are hitting quota. Right now, it's okay if it's not 100% or even close to it, but getting candidness around that. And if it's not, like, what's the plan to get there is a good thing to do. I think it's also important to talk to actual reps on the team, right? Sometimes there's a bigger story at play. It's okay if, the 3 reps that are on the team right now, they're all hitting. Sure, that's cool, but how are you planning to get the next 20 reps that you're hiring like crazy to that point as well, right? And I have personal experience sort of with this too. So that's really important to vet. And I think too, also thinking about, and this may be a little bit more, it requires a little bit more research and maybe maturity and experience too. So again, conscious that a fresh college grad is going to have a different ability to vet for these things, and maybe someone who's been in the game for a little bit longer. But really sort of thinking about the market that the company is in. Like, do you have an understanding of the market, the viability of the product, basically all leading to product market fit and its ability to get to the growth goals that the revenue team is striving for. I think that's really important too, right? Like, if, for instance, I've been in MarTech for a very long time, right? So I can kind of get a sense of, all right, what actually might be a really disruptive, revolutionary product that completely blows out of the water other incumbents or whatnot, right? It might be a little bit more difficult, again, if you don't sort of have that industry experience, but something to really consider.
Every founder thinks their technology is like revolutionized. Everyone needs it. It's going to be the next unicorn. Statistically, It's not. Like, statistically, it's going to fail. So what are some of the other things like that really influence a sales rep's success beyond their skill?
So, I mean, we've hopefully all heard of the 3 T's, right? Territory, timing, and talent. And those really being...
Not everyone's heard of the 3 T's. Educate us.
That's true. Sure, yeah, I mean, that I shouldn't even say that. I only really learned about it maybe 2 years ago, right? Or when I was already well into my...
The first time I ever heard of it was right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the 3 T's, territory, timing, and talent, in that order, really are going to be the determinants of your success, right? So kind of just to break that down, territory, the best rep in the world is not going to be outselling a shitty territory, right? I've seen situations where, people who are really talented, really good, but they were put in situations where either it was all sort of inbound and it was just kind of luck of the draw in terms of who they got. I'm not really allowed to do outbound. Maybe it was outbound, but a Nebraska or Iowa type of situation when maybe their lesser talented peers were working in California or New York, right? We'd be stupid to not pretend the territory really influences your ability to be successful. So that's really critical. Timing is, we've all been in that situation where a deal closes really quickly because the person was ready to buy, right? They had a budget, they knew what they wanted, they maybe just had a couple more questions to clarify with you, and you're off to the races and you can get some really good deals that way. Compare that to somebody who you're talking to who's completely unaware of your product. There's a lot of education that needs to take place, consensus building, etc. You can make a lot of timing work for you if you work hard, of course, do the activities and kind of create a bit of your luck in that way, but timing is huge, probably one of the more important ones. And talent is, again, what you can arguably control, right? Your skill set, your ability to do good prospecting, run good discovery, negotiation, just running good sales cycles in general. But arguably the least important of the 3. Not saying that you shouldn't focus on improving your skill set, but we'd be delusional to not really be aware of the fact that the other 2 factors have a much larger factor in your success. So if you were a sales rep, then let's say, and you are vetting a new opportunity and sort of thinking what your next step is, get that initial positioning right. When you're having those conversations, like, what territory would I potentially be owning if I were to be in this role, right? And we know there's always going to be risks. There's always going to be changing factors. You can't 100% sort of mitigate that in the interview process, but try to do that as much as possible, and you'll be a lot further ahead than a lot of your peers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I understand how the smaller the company is, the younger it is as a startup, the higher the risk, because all of that's unknown. They don't have that product market fit yet. They don't know if the broad market timing is right for a product like this. Is it too early? Is it 2 year, like Uber, was it 2 years too early when it was first pitched? That broad timing, you can never quite tell in those early stage startups, and your territory is like the world, which actually isn't necessarily easy. Rather have a territory of like, here's the state, but the state next door is crushing it, than the whole of the US, but it's unproven.
Right, yeah, and from a timing perspective, just to add to that too, it's like selling Zoom during COVID is an easy one, right? Compared to if you were selling event management software during COVID. Doesn't matter if you were the best rep in the world doing the latter, you're going to do much more poorly than a shitty rep who was at Zoom at the time.
Yeah, it's so interesting this, because I see the problem on the opposite end all the time, where sales leaders are saying, how do we carve up territory? And it really is challenging when you're taking away from some. Here we have Rachel, she's got a target of $1 million, and that's her on-target earnings, and she currently has the whole of New York, and we're about to split New York into two and keep her target the same. And this kind of happens, right? Where do you sit, or what's your view on that? Like, as a company grows, it needs to start doing that, but it's often at the sales rep's expense.
This is, again, I don't know if I have a definitive answer to it, right? I don't think there's any easy sort of one-size-fits-all solution as to what's going to be the best situation. Maybe the macro thought around it, as it should be, is grow slowly but sensibly, right? Don't add on too many reps when you're unsure of whether all those reps are going to be successful in the role, and the downstream effects of carving up territories and whatnot like then falls under that. But again, like, what model are you using to dictate the need for this extra headcount? Is it just because your investor said, no, we have to now grow 5x this year, right? So you're going to go ahead and hire those additional reps? Or is it based on the fact that your demand is going through the roof, right? Like, you are a Zoom during COVID, and like, we need folks to actually manage all these deals. I know not everyone's going to be in that fortunate situation necessarily, but I think overall it just is maybe a requirement to just be a little bit more thoughtful in terms of your growth approach.
I like how you framed it originally of like, just know the game that you're playing in for these reps, because this is part of how a company will grow. It will start carving up territory. It will start increasing targets. When targets are easy to hit, they will start raising them. You know, they ultimately will acquire customers for as cheap as possible. Like, that's part of their strategy. And the sales reps, the big cost in that acquisition cost. And they'll find ways like, if I don't need a good rep because I'm selling Zoom during COVID, I'm not going to pay 30% above market. Like, why would I? It wouldn't make sense. So, I mean, what you've painted here for me is just a completely different approach to how reps should even be analyzing their jobs in where they're applying. It's like there's a lot of strategy involved before you get down to practicing your cold calls and your discovery questions.
Yeah. No, of course. I think, sorry, go for it.
No, I was just going to shift gears a little bit and say, like, I get this whole comp plan, and it's so hyper relevant at the moment. We've got about 5% unemployment in Australia. Things are a little bit different to over in the States. In the States, it seems like sales reps are being laid off in these mass layoffs like we've never seen before. I was just going to shift gear a little bit to more to the company side, like where you're currently advising. What's the one problem that when you see it gets you excited, like, oh, I want to fix that?
I think it's what I'm seeing from a founder perspective, right? So for context here, I had a stint founding my own startup. This was before Metadata. I was part of a tech incubator called Entrepreneur First. And as part of that, I had the good fortune to really be paid to leave my job, find a co-founder, and start a new venture together. It was, a really exciting experiment for me. I'd never even considered doing anything like that, but was recruited to join and had a really good experience doing it. I discontinued that startup, so it was around about maybe month 5 of the program. The founder fit wasn't quite there, but still an unforgettable experience. And downstream benefit was that I gained immediate access to pretty much their entire founder network of other early stage founders, around about, I think it was like 3,000 or so at the time globally. Amazing. So it was through that experience that I then started doing some of this coaching work on the side. So really the problem that I was noticing was a lot of these technical founders who had really good ideas and had a lot of deep market experience or industry experience in their respective sectors just didn't have the basic sales knowledge, right? To kind of bring that to market, articulate that to customers, even think about a value prop, think about who their ICP is in a way that would really enable them to be successful with their venture. So that was really kind of the primary problem that I saw, and I've since started working with a number of those founders in just kind of like a coaching advisory capacity, sort of thinking through some of those like core foundational things that if you've been in sales for a while, it seems to be pretty straightforward. But of course, if you're someone who's like a first-time founder and doing this for the first time with zero sales acumen, it can be a bit of a tall order. So that's really exciting to me because, again, just getting to draw on that experience and help others.
Yeah, that's such a huge problem for technical founders. And how long is the journey? You're a founder, you've got a product that's developed, it's ready to be sold. Like, how long are you finding it's taking founders to go from this, like, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, to having a decent enough positioning that they could actually go to market effectively?
Well, it really depends, right? The funny thing is, through this work, I found that sometimes the problems extend beyond just not knowing a B2B sales process, which is really interesting, right? I've worked with people who, like, upon learning more about them and sort of talking through sometimes it's deeper seated, sometimes it's like odd, like money beliefs, even an embarrassment to ask somebody for money in exchange for a product or service that you're selling. It's funny because some of these founders are really good at what they do. They're even able to raise like millions of dollars in funding. But when talking to face-to-face with a customer and when it comes to just making a sale, there's this weird roadblock. And it's funny because when you've been in the game for a little bit, it's like, okay, you maybe can't relate to it. But thinking back, like, I came from a creative background, right? I wasn't, I guess I didn't do business school or anything like that before going into sales. So I was a very introverted person and also had some of those mental roadblocks to doing sales effectively. So it's almost like getting to revisit that. It's like, yeah, I can relate to you. Never think all the way back there. And it's just about, from that point, dismantling some of that stuff and helping them overcome that. And from their sales process, anyone can learn, right? That's kind of like a hard skill. Some of the softer things that you need to uncover a little bit before you can actually implement some of the process.
Yeah. Sounds like incredibly valuable coaching. It really is. And I see this very, like, technical founders don't know what they don't know and need people like you to support them on that. And you talk about this B2B sales process. I was giving a training yesterday where I was saying relatively similar things to you. We were talking just outbound, and I was saying, like, who you call makes a bigger difference than what you're saying to them. If you call the wrong person, it's all irrelevant. And if you call the right person, even if you fumble through your cold call, like, if it's a problem that's hyper relevant for them, you're still more likely to get a positive outcome. And it's the same with sales. So there's two last things I'd really like to touch on. Like, one is, which you'll appreciate as a creative and working in MarTech, the unspoken about significant influence that marketing has in sales. Like, everyone thinks sales is just about sales, but there's greased tracks and then there's a frictionful process. There's two very different experiences. And the second thing I wanted to touch on is around this process. So let's just first, like, the influence of marketing in sales. It's not spoken about, right? Because we don't talk about our Cinderella downstairs, the marketing department. Like, what have you seen living in both worlds?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been on both sides of the spectrum. I've been at tiny 10-person startups where there was zero marketing engine, really true, raw, gritty startup, just balls to the wall, outbound, before obviously getting funding and sort of getting that up and running, all the way to companies like Hootsuite, where I first started my tech sales career, where one of the best marketing engines in the world. Everyone knew that was like the number one social media management platform at the time, right? And it's funny too, again, thinking back, like just starting that sales job and thinking like even when you close a deal, it's like, man, I'm like really good at my job. And sure, maybe some of that was my skill set, but let's be real. Again, like you have the brand recognition, like they're faced with choosing number one at this price point versus maybe number three, number four. Like, think about these other factors that go into your actual success and sort of close rate. So yeah, having experienced both sides, I mean, if your goal is to, again, sort of be successful in sales, just go into whatever opportunity that you're going into with your eyes wide open, right? Like expect if you're going to a smaller stage startup, recognize you're not going to have the help of marketing, there are things that you can do to raise the bar a little bit. So for me, for instance, at that small startup, I started posting a lot on LinkedIn at that time. This was back in 2019, 2018. And that helped me a lot at the time. Like, this was when social selling wasn't even really kind of like a thing as much as it is now.
Yeah.
But just, sharing more about sort of industry news, sort of thinking through like the conversations that I was having with customers, sharing them, that was really not done, especially in the industry that I was in at the time, which was accessibility. Very niche. No one knew about it, at least definitely not the business buyers that I was working with, right? So kind of parlaying some of that stuff and making it very understandable, I think contributed a lot to my success and eventual number one rep standing at that company. But and then if you're going to a larger firm, again, you can, one of the good things to do is to definitely assess the level of marketing quality that company is doing. So Hootsuite drew me for that reason. Metadata is really good at their marketing too. We're obviously marketing technology. So that all of that stuff is going to go a long way in terms of your success too.
I would love to see a graph. I wonder if something like this existed between the success of the sales reps and the strength of the marketing team, the marketing leader versus the sales leader. I bet you there's almost a stronger correlation between the sales reps and the marketing leader versus the sales reps and their sales leader. Yeah.
It just has to be such a closed, like a quick feedback loop. Right? And I think that's one of the things that Metadata does really well is that we have a very close alignment with our marketing team. Like if we're hearing something on calls and then we have Gong that records all that stuff and gets passed to the marketing team, they can use that to then spin up content that answers a lot of the questions that folks are asking on these calls and using that to do demand gen and create ebooks, content, sort of distribute it as needed. So I think having that really tight alignment, like it's a tale as old as time, but seeing it done well in practice is a game changer.
Yeah, well, there's a reason your business is doing well and others aren't, right? And that's probably a big one. The last thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned this B2B sales process. And similarly, when I was giving this training yesterday, I was saying, like, if you're able to do a good discovery call, if you're able to follow a buyer's journey, matching it with solid sales processes, that's all you need. You don't have to be able to convince someone to spend $50,000 more than they need. Like, that is not effective selling, or not a way to build a long, sustainable career. What have you found in terms of like talent versus people who follow process? Like, where would you rank those two?
Well, I mean, you need both, right? I think though the best way to think about that in terms of like what is an effective sales process is start with the buyer's journey, right? And that's going to be different at every single company you're at. Like someone in old school oil and gas company might buy things very differently to marketing managers buying something like Metadata, right? So really spend the time to get to know how your typical buyer buys software. Do they educate themselves on LinkedIn or forums before making decisions? Do they frequent certain communities to kind of get recommendations from their peers? And like all this is underscored by the pretty big fact that the average buyer spends about like 9% of their decision-making time with the seller. Mm-hmm. So if we think about the very little amount of time that we actually have to spend real time with our buyer, the question then becomes, okay, how can we kind of best, let's say, like influence the outcome in our favor by thinking about what they're doing when they're not talking to us, the other 91% of the time, right? So thinking about the buyer's journey, how they educate themselves, how they make themselves aware of your problem, how they then maybe vet the different vendors in the space, like looking at G2 or other review sites, pulling their friends and tailoring your process to that. And I think the key to a really good discovery call in that situation is thinking through, or like really kind of making a point to ask them, where are you in your buying journey, right? Are you literally just exploring, you don't even have a clear idea of what your problem is, or have you got a budget and you're looking at a couple of competitors and you're ready to make a decision within a certain timeline? So that, I think, arguably is of the two most important things that you can really kind of uncover in that first call. And again, you don't have to be grinding to sell and pitch, especially, again, when we think about how much they're educating themselves outside of that call.
Yeah, amazing. So look, I've learned a lot here, or I've had certain beliefs validated. I certainly learned like the 3 T's and other things, but if I was to kind of bring this all together, you've painted a picture of sales being a very strategic opportunity where the company you go to, the setup of that company, the leadership of that company, the product itself, the timing in the market, the territory you're given is a huge influence in your success, more so than your ability to follow up on tasks and load opportunities into a CRM and update Salesforce. Like, those things matter. The rest does too, because a bad rep with a good product and a good market can still fail, right? But I think you've mentioned before, an average rep at a great company will do better than a great rep at an average company.
Right. And certainly for listeners, please do not take this as a message to strive for mediocrity. Just kind of highlighting some of these truths, but it's not a whole pass to just throw in the towel.
Yeah. But I think it's really important that you do then at least consider who your gurus are on LinkedIn. Like, the sellers that are doing well, some of them are in very fortunate positions to be selling Zoom during COVID. Like, that's what they're selling. And now they're telling you how they did this incredible feat. Now, some of them at Zoom during COVID were incredible because they could have sold half the amount and they sold double the amount. I'm not trying to take away from some of the incredible people. One of my colleagues worked at Zoom and like unbelievable outcomes, what he managed to achieve. But they don't know what it was like you've mentioned, for the people that were selling events during COVID or had something else. So those are the genuinely talented hustlers that have a little bit of a different story. So we can't just learn from those that were fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. But I think everyone should be learning from you, and hopefully my audience at least gets to learn a little bit from this and experience some of your wisdom. If somebody wanted to work with you, give me two things. So firstly, just another quick snapshot of what do they look like? And if they look like that or they're experiencing that, they should have the thought, let me speak to Rachel. And then at the end of that, if they did experience that or they did look right, how do they get hold of you?
For sure. Yeah, so people who typically work well with me are early stage founders, so seed stage, or kind of just hitting that stride of product market fit. They know they're onto something, but they feel like they're lacking the ability to really get a hold of as many customers as they actually can be. They're also maybe too early for hiring a sales leader or account executive, and they need to brush up on their own sales skills before even knowing what good looks like. That's my ideal customer, let's say, or client. So if that kind of fits your profile, let me know. I'm easily found on LinkedIn. Is probably the best place to find me, and we can have a conversation about that.
Amazing. That is such an interesting place to be, that like perfecting founder-led sales before building out this huge process between there and your hiring your VP of sales, building out their team. That is like I probably think the most difficult part of any startup. So you've got some challenges on your hands, and any company would be lucky to have your support in traversing those troubled waters. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm going to also share, if you don't mind, some of your drawings, some of your artwork, because they are just incredible. And you should do more of them. Are you still doing them?
I am. Yeah, so if anyone wants to check out my drawings as well, they can check out my Substack. It's just myname.substack.com, Rachel Shi. And yeah, it's something that, we were talking about this before, it's something that I used to do a lot more prior to getting into sales. And earlier this year, one of my resolutions was to start exercising that muscle a little bit more. So yeah, pretty much just started with a lot of kind of like observations that I was making around LinkedIn stuff or sales stuff. There's a lot of funny and like absurd stuff that happens in our industry. So yeah, I've been posting them on LinkedIn, and a lot of people seem to like them. I've gotten some like commission requests and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, yeah, just give my Substack a follow.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being on. Everyone should do it. Highly recommended. And Rachel, we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Ricky.
Cheers.